It was one of those humid late spring days when the air feels like it's holding its breath. June 10th, 1989, Graybridge, population just under 12,000 old, simmered in the kind of quiet that only small towns get used to. Lawn sprinklers ticked in slow arcs across brittle grass. Windshields shimmered in the afternoon heat. And inside the public library, the air conditioner groaned in fit, trying to keep up. Eliza Hart didn't mind the heat. She loved the way the light fell through the tall windows in the late afternoon, cutting clean shapes across the floor. Her usual spot was in the back corner, nestled between the oversized dictionaries and the forgotten encyclopedias books too heavy for most kids her age to bother with. But Eliza wasn't most kids. She was 11, thin as a pencil, with wild brown hair that refused to be tamed and a quiet way of moving that made adults forget she was there at all. She came to the library nearly every day after school, and on Saturdays. She stayed until closing. She didn't have many friends, and some kids teased her, called her Ghost Girl because she never talked much and always seemed to appear out of nowhere, barefoot, or in mismatched shoes, with a book clutched like a lifeline. That day, she checked out the secret garden, again, her favorite. She said the old house and the overgrown garden made her feel like there were places still untouched by everything bad, that a hidden door could be a kind of hope. She smiled more when she read it. At 3:42 p.m., a librarian named Mrs. Langford saw Eliza walk toward the stairwell that led to the basement archive. No one questioned it. The archive wasn't off limits, just neglected, mostly used for storing old newspapers and out-of-date catalogs. The light down there flickered. The room smelled of mildew and dry paper. But Eliza liked it, said it was quieter than quiet. She was never seen again. By 5:15 p.m., the library was closing. Mrs. Langford noticed the book return chute hadn't been emptied. When she checked, only one book was inside the secret garden. No return card, no initials, just the book. When Eliza didn't come home for dinner, her mother, Nora Hart, assumed she'd lost track of time. It wasn't the first time Eliza wandered, and the library was only 6 blocks away. But when dusk rolled in and Eliza still hadn't come back, Nora called the police. Officer Brennan took the call. He'd known Eliza's father, Daniel Hart, before he passed, killed in a roadside accident 2 years earlier. Brennan drove the neighborhood loop twice. No sign. He checked the library, found nothing. No bags, no belongings, just a forgotten sweater in the lost and found. By nightfall, search crews were walking the banks of the river that curled behind the town's edge like a lazy spine. Flashlights swept across the water. K-9 units sniffed through brush and bramble. Helicopters came 2 days later. Reporters, cameras, microphones, rumors. But no Eliza. The investigation stretched into July. Then August. Leads fizzled. One man swore he saw a blue car speeding away from the library around 4 p.m. that day. A woman said she thought she saw Eliza at a bus station in Rutland, 20 miles north. A psychic claimed Eliza's spirit was trapped underground, somewhere sacred and silent. Police humored them all, but the trail went cold. Posters faded toward telephone poles. The Hart family porch light stayed on every night. Nora barely left the house. She refused to pack up Eliza's room, kept the windows shut, the bed made. There were no funeral arrangements, just silence. A long, aching silence. What no one admitted not out loud was that the town had already buried her. Not physically, but emotionally. Graybridge didn't like things it couldn't explain. And Eliza Hart had become one of them. An unsolved question. A ghost story. The library stayed open. Barely. Attendance dropped. Parents told kids to stay in groups. Eventually, the library stopped letting children downstairs. The city didn't fund renovations. Lights dimmed. Paint peeled. By 2003, only one librarian remained. By 2010, the town labeled the building historically significant but structurally compromised. In other words, no one wanted to deal with it. But the story stayed alive in the way stories always do in small towns. Teenagers dared each other to sneak into the basement at night. Some claimed to hear tapping from behind the walls. Others swore they saw a flicker of light under the door, even when the power was off. People said Eliza never left, that she'd been buried behind bricks and books and bureaucratic negligence. Even the skeptics didn't like going down there alone. In school yearbooks, her classmates left her page blank. Every 10th grade edition after that included a tribute still missing, never forgotten. When her class graduated in 1996, someone wore a gown with her name embroidered in white thread on the inside collar. No one ever admitted who, but the town moved on, as towns do. Not maliciously, just slowly, quietly. By the time 2020 rolled around, Eliza's name had become a kind of echo. Most of the kids in town had never heard it. Their parents rarely spoke it. The library was scheduled for demolition that summer to make way for a parking lot expansion. New money, the mayor said. Progress. But before the wrecking ball came the cleanup crew. And before the cleanup crew came Vince Harrow with a hammer and a pry bar and a union timesheet. And before that, 31 years earlier, came the last known moment of Eliza Hart's life. Her scream, sharp and sudden, swallowed by stone and dust. And then silence. Lester Bellamy always wore a gray suit. Not because it was required. He wasn't a judge or a pastor or anything official like that. But because he believed in appearances. Gray was neutral, respectable, forgettable. He wanted to be remembered just enough to stay trusted, but never so much that people asked questions. And in Graybridge, that was a fine line to walk. He served as deputy mayor from 1982 to 1990, during which time he also chaired the library board, the historical committee, and the land zoning council. He had a hand in nearly every decision involving money, space, or memory. A true civic man. People liked him. He remembered names. He sent holiday cards. When your kid graduated or your father passed, Bellamy showed up. Not too flashy, never too close, just enough to make people feel seen. He was, in the way of small town politics, untouchable. Which is why, when Eliza Hart went missing, no one looked at him. The day after Eliza disappeared, Bellamy held a press conference on the front steps of Town Hall. Gray suit, black tie. He stood with his hands folded over the podium like a preacher at a funeral. "This is a tragedy," he said. "Eliza is one of our own. We are coordinating with local authorities to aid the search. And I ask you all, please don't lose hope." People nodded. Some wept. Nora Hart sat in the front row, clutching a tissue until her knuckles turned white. Bellamy put a hand on her shoulder afterward, said all the right things, said if there was anything she needed, anything, he would see to it personally. But here's what never made the paper. He'd been in the library that afternoon. According to janitor logs from that summer, Bellamy had access to the building's master keys. Not unusual, he chaired the board. He claimed to be reviewing the archive holdings for the Historical Trust. Said he was updating a grant proposal. He told Mrs. Langford he'd be in the basement for a few hours, asked not to be disturbed. She thought nothing of it. It wasn't until years later that someone, an intern, reviewing old building records, noticed that Bellamy had been inside the library 5 times in the month before Eliza vanished, each time for hours, each time alone in the basement. The archivist's office across the street, yet he never used it. He said the lighting in the library basement was better for close reading. When the intern brought this to the town council, it was dismissed as irrelevant. A coincidence, they said, a dead end. Bellamy had died 4 years earlier, in 2006. Heart attack, no heirs, nothing to question anymore. But the gray suit lingered. Mark Drenner never forgot. 12 years old in 1989, Mark had been riding his bike past the library that day. He always noticed who came and went, not because he was nosy, but because he was curious, observant, a little awkward, like Eliza. Maybe that's why he saw what others didn't. Around 4:15 p.m., he said, he saw Bellamy come out of the library's side entrance, the one near the alley. Said he was locking the door, something he'd never seen him do before. Bellamy turned, noticed him, and waved. Mark waved back. But something felt off. The man's shirt sleeves were rolled up, which was unusual. His tie was loose, and the alley behind him smelled like burnt paper. Mark told the police. They took notes, said they'd look into it. They never followed up. The thing about Bellamy was that his charm made people doubt themselves. He didn't lie outright. He reframed. He softened. He leaned into the pauses between words and filled them with just enough warmth to make you question your instincts. When rumors began about improper permits, missing funds, suspicious land transfers, Bellamy answered with documents, signed, stamped, all in order, he'd say, offering the paper with an open hand and a closed smile. But Eliza had seen something else. We know this now, decades too late. But in 2020, when they found her behind that wall, they found more than just her remains. They found the charred edge of a property ledger. They found documents that should have been stored in the municipal archive, burnt, half erased. They found a silver money clip engraved with the initials LB. There was a reason Bellamy chose the library basement. It was quiet. It was accessible. It had no cameras, no foot traffic, and no questions. And more importantly, it had a second exit, an old storage hallway, once used for book deliveries, later sealed off after a fire code revision in 1985. Bellamy had kept a copy of the old keys. No one knew the hallway still connected through the annex foundation, except Eliza. Or rather, Eliza had stumbled across it, probably by accident. She liked secret doors. After all, she wasn't snooping. She wasn't trying to catch anyone. She was reading, exploring, doing what she always did, searching for something quiet, something sacred. And Bellamy, cornered, holding documents that could end everything, panicked. Or maybe not. Maybe it wasn't panic at all. After her disappearance, Bellamy lobbied hard to redirect town funds from the library to a community memorial initiative. He said it would honor Eliza and support grieving families. The funds were never fully accounted for. Neither was the land that was bought later that year by a shell company that resold it to Bellamy's cousin. 3 months later, the cousin deeded it back to the town, with Bellamy as executor. The records exist. Pieces, anyway. Most were destroyed, but not all. Not the brick, not the body, not the boy on the bike who remembered. In the end, Lester Bellamy got what he wanted. He died respected, honored. Even his obituary read like a saint's eulogy. Devoted public servant, a steward of Graybridge. But the suit didn't matter in the dark. And 31 years later, when that wall cracked open, it wasn't just bones they found. It was the truth, stitched into silence, finally beginning to unravel. Vince Harrow had no clue he was about to change the town's history. He was just there for the overtime. A 43-year-old contractor with a bad knee and a worse attitude, Vince wasn't sentimental about old buildings. He didn't care that the library was historically significant. To him, it was a crumbling box full of mold and memories best left forgotten. He'd done demo jobs all over Vermont, but none felt this. Still, the kind of still that didn't breathe, that didn't even echo. The job was simple. Clear out debris from the basement, tear up the old flooring, prep the foundation for grading before the wrecking crew arrived. The following week, in and out, 2 days max. He just wanted to get paid, but something about the far wall bugged him. The southeast corner of the basement was darker than the rest. No overhead bulb, no outlets, just shadows and a cold draft that shouldn't have been there. The walls were stone and brick, uneven in a way that didn't quite match the rest of the foundation. Vince had seen enough retrofitted basements to know when something didn't belong. He dragged a work light over and began clearing the space. Old shelving units stacked with brittle paper, rusted filing cabinets, spider webs thick enough to feel like rope. The air was heavy with mildew and a strange, coppery scent. Not quite blood, not quite rust. He pulled off his gloves and ran his hand across the wall. The mortar was cracked. One of the bricks, lower right side, sat crooked in the frame. It wobbled slightly under pressure. Vince squinted, frowned. Instinct kicked in. He grabbed his pry bar. At first, the brick resisted. He tapped around it, knocked a few times. The hollow sound behind it confirmed what he suspected. There was space back there. Not just a loose brick, a cavity. Vince wedged the bar in deeper and pulled. With a dull snap, the brick popped loose and fell to the floor. Dust coughed out from the opening in a slow exhale, like the wall itself had been holding its breath for decades. He aimed his flashlight inside. The beam hit fabric, first faded denim, stiff with time, then bone, small, too small. Vince staggered back. He called it in. By nightfall, the Graybridge Police Department had taped off the entire library. The building was declared a crime scene for the first time in over 3 decades. Officers in gloves and masks combed through the basement like it was an archaeological dig. Chief Emily Serrano, only 7 years old when Eliza vanished, stood silently as the forensic team worked. She remembered the missing posters. She remembered her mother crying while folding laundry, whispering, "That poor girl." Now she was watching them pull human remains out of a cavity behind a wall no more than 3 feet deep, just wide enough to hold the curl shape of a child. Clutched in one of the skeletal hands was a rusted metal chain tangled around the edge of a melted library card. Dental records confirmed the identity in less than 48 hours. Eliza Hart had been found. But that wasn't all. Behind the brick wall, investigators discovered an old wooden crate wrapped in what appeared to be painter's cloth, sealed with rusted wire. Inside were scorched documents, ledgers, maps, half-burnt envelopes bearing the town's official seal. Most were unreadable. Some weren't. One name appeared again and again: Bellamy. The murderer. Most of the paperwork had to do with land transfers, zoning requests, and budget adjustments, all years old, all predating Eliza's disappearance. One folder was labeled in smudged ink: Foundation Permit, Annex, 1984. Inside it was a photocopy of a construction diagram and a receipt from a private contractor in Montpelier paid in cash. The side wall Eliza had been buried behind wasn't part of the original blueprint. Someone had added it later. The media caught on fast. A cold case like this, solved by accident after 31 years, was irresistible. Headlines splashed across every major paper in Vermont. Body found in library wall. Identified as missing girl, small town horror. Eliza Hart's remains recovered was Graybridge's deputy mayor hiding a deadly secret. Satellite trucks lined Main Street. Journalists harassed former town employees. The state crime lab got involved, and all of Graybridge found itself pulled back into a tragedy it had never truly processed. Some reacted with shock, others with a grim sort of vindication. "I told you," muttered Ron Jeffries, the ex-janitor who'd once said that Bellamy spent too much time in the basement. "I told everyone." Nobody listened. But listening came easy when there was a body Nora Hart was found at home, sitting at her kitchen table, a full cup of tea untouched in front of her. When Chief Serrano told her the news, she didn't cry. She just nodded, closed her eyes, and whispered. She was here all along. The house was silent. Eliza's room was still preserved, just as she'd left it. The floral wallpaper, the stack of books on the nightstand, the empty bed made each morning without fail. Nora walked into the room that night, sat on the edge of the mattress, and let herself sob for the first time in years, not because of grief, but because the silence had finally ended. Her daughter wasn't lost. She had been taken, and she had been found. The next town council meeting was held in emergency session. The mayor, a nervous man in his 50s who had inherited more problems than he solved, looked physically ill as the evidence was reviewed. The library demolition was put on indefinite hold. The state's attorney began preparing a posthumous case against Lester Bellamy, a man who could no longer answer questions, but whose fingerprints were all over the hidden history of Graybridge. It was only the beginning, because the wall hadn't just held Eliza's body. It had held everything the town had tried to forget. The crate had been sealed so tightly, it took 2 forensic techs and a blowtorch to get it open without disintegrating everything inside. When they lifted the lid, the room filled with the dry, acrid smell of burned paper, dust, and time. What remained was a jumbled archive of secrets, half-melted file tabs, rust-streaked paper clips in heat-warped manila folders, each piece fragile, each one a clue. They laid it all out on steel tables in the evidence lab, charred legal documents, some barely readable, others more intact than anyone expected. Among them, a partially preserved ledger bound in cracked leather, the top right corner seared to ash, but the rest legible. On the first page, scrawled in clean black ink, Grant Fund Adjustments, 1981-1989. And below that, an even more revealing subtitle, Reallocations via Historical Annex Shell Entities. Chief Serrano flipped the page with gloved hands. Her mouth tightened as the pattern began to emerge. It wasn't just a ledger. It was a confession dressed in numbers. The columns were neatly written. Date, property code, parcel owner, reclamation method, transfer entity, final disposition. It looked official. It was precise and utterly damning. Serrano called in a financial crimes analyst from the state capitol to decipher the scheme. It didn't take long. What Bellamy had done was simple and insidious. Over 8 years, he had quietly redirected city funds meant for historical preservation into fake companies. These shell entities purchased decaying properties for artificially inflated values, filed for restoration grants, and then resold the properties, often back to the city itself for profit. Each transaction was signed, filed, and buried under layers of bureaucracy. The library was one of the early test cases. Records showed that in 1984, Bellamy had submitted a request to expand the library's basement to include an archival annex. The proposal passed unanimously. thanks in part to a glowing recommendation from Bellamy himself, citing the town's unquantifiable need for preserving its cultural memory. Construction was approved. But when the city disbursed the $47,000 grant, no such annex was built. Instead, a wall was added, not an expansion and erasure. A section of the basement was sealed off with cinder block, camouflaged to blend with the original foundation. That was the wall Eliza had been found behind. She wasn't buried, she was hidden. Inside the crate, they also found a nameplate, Graybridge Vault Company. It had melted edges and a scorched logo, barely visible under soot. An inquiry revealed the company had shut down in 1981, citing bankruptcy. But before it dissolved, it had held secure records for the city archives, permits, and property contracts dating back to the 1950s. A former employee told investigators the company was pressured into destruction orders by an official from the mayor's office. He couldn't recall the name, but the timing matched the disappearance of multiple records tied to land transfer disputes, records that would have proven Bellamy's corruption if ever challenged. They weren't just dealing with a murder, they were dealing with a cover-up that had infected the town's very infrastructure. And Eliza, she had stumbled into it. Serrano pieced together the likeliest scenario. Eliza, always curious, had found the unfinished annex. Perhaps the door was ajar. Maybe she saw the light from the old delivery hallway. Or maybe she just followed the sound papers, rustling, fire crackling, someone down there when no one else was supposed to be. Whatever she saw, she never got to tell. The working theory, she witnessed Bellamy destroying documents that didn't belong to him. Or worse, she found them before he did. A folder dropped. A signature she didn't understand. Evidence she couldn't interpret but instinctively knew was wrong. She wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was in his place. His secret place. The one he thought no one would ever enter. He made sure of that. What struck Serrano hardest was the precision of it all. There was no sign of panic in how Eliza was hidden. No haste. The cavity behind the wall had been designed to hold something specific, something shaped like a child. She imagined Bellamy, still in his gray suit, laying brick by brick with steady hands. How long did it take? Hours. How many people walked upstairs, just feet above, checking out books, thumbing through encyclopedias, unaware that behind the stone wall, a girl was being erased. Serrano took the ledger home that night. She shouldn't have, but she couldn't leave it alone. She sat at her kitchen table until thrilled, flipping page after page, seeing how deep the rot went. Every transaction was a thread, every signature a needle that had sewn together a town-sized lie. And yet Eliza, quiet, curious, barefoot, Eliza had pulled one loose. Had she lived? Had she made it upstairs with that folder or note or memory of what she saw? Bellamy's entire empire might have collapsed. She had seen the secret garden, and he had bricked it shut. The next morning, Serrano stood before the town council. She laid the evidence across the long oak table, one piece at a time, the ledger, the burned annex permits, the money trail, the melted nameplate, the forensic reports, and the picture of Eliza's remains curled up behind the bricks. No one spoke for almost a full minute. Then Councilwoman Irene Voss, who had once campaigned on preserving Bellamy's legacy of service, took off her glasses and said, voice shaking, "What do we do now?" Serrano didn't hesitate. "We open everything. We audit every transaction from 1980 to 1990. We release a public report, and we clear Eliza Hart's name." She looked each of them in the eye, and we stopped pretending this town was clean. By week's end, the governor's office had dispatched a special commission to review Graybridge's zoning and redevelopment history. Archivists began the slow process of digitizing what was left of the old records, and Eliza's name was restored in the state's missing and unsolved files, not as a question mark, but as a resolved case. Cause of death, blunt force, trauma, manner, homicide, offender deceased. But the full story was still unfolding. The ledger only scratched the surface. More names were in it. More hands were dirty. And in a basement crate sealed for 3 decades, the truth had been waiting. Waiting for someone to see what Eliza saw. Mark Drenner didn't even realize he'd been holding his breath until he saw her name on the news ticker. Eliza Hart's remains discovered in Graybridge Library. He froze. The TV flickered in his tiny apartment just outside Syracuse, the same channel he always left on in the background. He hadn't lived in Graybridge for over 20 years, hadn't said her name out loud in almost as long, but there it was. Real. Confirmed. They found her. He sat down slowly, the air thick in his chest. He was 12 the last time he saw Eliza, and he had never forgotten. In the summer of 1989, Mark was the kind of kid who stayed out too late and rode his bike everywhere. He was curious, a little awkward, quiet around adults, but observant as hell. While other kids swam at the quarry or loitered at the arcade, Mark liked to watch people. He noticed patterns, gestures, routines. He also noticed the library, and on that Saturday afternoon, the one Eliza vanished. He happened to be riding past it on his usual loop, dodging sidewalk cracks and coasting towards the back alley shortcut he always used. That's when he saw the man in the gray suit. At the time, he didn't know who Lester Bellamy was, just that he looked like someone important. Polished shoes, neatly combed hair, a loosened tie, and rolled up sleeves, which struck Mark as odd in the middle of June. Bellamy was standing by the side entrance of the library, the old staff door nobody used anymore, fiddling with a large key ring. The door was half closed behind him, and something about the way he kept glancing over his shoulder made Mark slow down. Bellamy looked up. Their eyes met. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just stared. Then, without breaking eye contact, he pushed the door closed and turned the key. Click. Mark biked away faster than he intended. He didn't know why. 2 days later, the posters went up. Missing Eliza Hart. Last seen Saturday, June 10th, at Graybridge Public Library. Mark's stomach dropped. He told his mom. She called the police. Mark described the man he saw, the door, the key. An officer came by the house, took a short statement. Mark tried to explain what he saw, the way Bellamy acted, the way he locked the door like he was hiding something. The officer asked if he was sure. Did he maybe confuse the day? Had he seen a librarian instead? Could it have been someone just closing up early? Mark insisted. He even drew a sketch square jaw, side-parted hair, gray suit, keys. The officer said he'd follow up. He never did. Over the years, Mark replayed that moment again and again, like a stuck tape loop in his brain. He convinced himself it didn't matter, that it wouldn't have made a difference, that no one would have believed a kid over a town official. But when the news broke, when the wall opened, and Eliza's name returned to the living world, Mark couldn't stay quiet anymore. He called the Graybridge Police Department the next morning. Chief Serrano didn't expect much when the receptionist handed her the note. Caller says he saw Bellamy locking library door in 89. But she called him anyway. Habit, curiosity, or maybe just a gut feeling. The moment Mark said her name, Eliza, she listened. He told her everything. The bike ride, the alley, the stair, the sound of the key turning in the lock, the way it had never left him. He still had the sketch. She asked if he could come to Graybridge in person. He was on the road by nightfall. Mark hadn't been back in 23 years. The town felt smaller, quieter, more tired. Some storefronts were the same, others gone. The library was still standing, but surrounded by police tape and floodlights now. The sight of it turned his stomach. Serrano met him in the station conference room. She had the same look he remembered from the officers who ignored him, serious, measured, but something in her eyes was different. She believed him. He showed her the sketch, creased and faded, but intact. He had kept it all this time in a plastic folder, buried in a box labeled Junk Drawer Childhood. It still looked like Bellamy. Serrano asked if he'd be willing to give a formal statement. Mark nodded. I've been waiting to for 30 years. Later that evening, Serrano pulled out the old file. Mark Drenner's 1989 witness report was in it, one paragraph long, signed by an officer who was now long retired. No mention of Bellamy by name, no follow-up, no supplemental report, just a note at the bottom, no further action unconfirmed. She stared at it, sickened. It had been right there. A child saw what adults wouldn't dare accuse, and the adults chose silence. The next day, Serrano took Mark to the library. He stood in front of the alley where he had seen Bellamy, now overgrown and cracked. The side door had been sealed for decades, but you could still see the outline in the brick, the faint scar of a passage hidden in plain sight. Mark didn't say much. He just stood there, quiet, like the boy he had been watching, remembering. When they left, Serrano promised she'd include his statement in the formal case report and the final public disclosure. "For the record," she said, "you were right." Mark gave a sad smile. Tell that to the kid who wasn't heard. By the end of the week, his name was included in the town's official findings. Witness statement, June 1989. Overlooked, verified, believed. At the town hall ceremony the following month, a small plaque was added to the new Eliza Hart Memorial Garden beside the preserved wall. On it were 4 names: hers, her mother Nora's, Chief Emily Serrano's, and Mark Drenner's. For seeing what others ignored, for remembering when it mattered, for not letting silence win. The door wasn't supposed to exist. According to the official library blueprints submitted to the city in 1983, the basement had 3 points of entry: the main stairwell, the janitor's corridor near the furnace, and a sealed utility hatch that hadn't been used in over a decade. But then the demolition crew found it. While removing drywall along the eastern foundation opposite the cavity where Eliza's body had been found, they struck something strange. Not stone, not brick, metal. The worker radioed it in. Chief Serrano arrived within the hour, helmet on, flashlight in hand. Her boots crunched over broken tile and shattered shelving as she followed the crew to the exposed wall. There, it was a narrow, steel-framed door, almost completely concealed under a false panel, painted to match the wall. No knob, just a recessed handle and a keyhole, long since rusted shut. She felt her pulse quicken. With a gentle tug, the door groaned open on warped hinges. Behind it, a corridor, 8 feet long, barely shoulder wide. Dust clung to the air like smoke. A single light fixture hung overhead, bulb shattered. At the end of the corridor was another door, this one wooden, heavy, bolted from the inside. Serrano leaned in. There were marks, deep grooves, like something had scratched at the wood from within. Not claws, not tools. Fingernails. She stepped back. "Seal this," she told the team. "We're doing this under full forensic protocol." They treated it like a crime scene because it was old blueprints from 1959 dug out from the town's forgotten archives confirmed what the newer ones hid. The door once led to a delivery tunnel connecting the library to the Graybridge Records Annex across the street. It had been used in the 60s and 70s to shuttle books, ledgers, and archival material. Then a fire code revision in 1984 rendered the tunnel non-compliant. It was supposed to have been sealed, but someone kept it open. Someone used it. Someone used it to disappear a child. The timeline now had teeth. Saturday, June the 10th, 1989. Bellamy entered the library through the side entrance using a master key. He told the librarian he'd be working downstairs. Around 3:42 p.m., Eliza was last seen descending into the basement with the secret garden. At approximately 4:15 p.m., Bellamy was seen locking the side door by Mark Drenner. At 4:32 p.m., an internal sensor from the utility district buried in a forgotten maintenance log recorded a brief electrical spike in the annex tunnel. It was written off at the time as static interference, but now it marked a likely moment of movement. Bellamy didn't just hide her behind a wall. He used a door no one remembered existed. Inside the hidden corridor, investigators found evidence of staging: scorched match tips, melted wax, a folding chair collapsed under dust, burnt fragments of city envelopes, a pair of latex gloves, degraded and brittle, and one more item, a small tin box. Inside, it were a handful of silver coins, a broken reading lamp bulb, and something else, a slip of paper with Eliza's name written in pen, underlined 3 times. A fingerprint. Just presence. It was the kind of discovery that made everyone in the room go quiet. Even after 31 years, the space still felt haunted, not by spirits, but by intent. Chief Serrano stood in that corridor for over an hour, just breathing. She imagined Eliza walking in, barefoot maybe, the edges of her book still warm in her hands. She would have looked at the lights. She would have heard Bellamy's voice. He probably smiled. He probably said, "It's okay. Eliza, come here." She probably did. She didn't scream until it was too late. The discovery of the hidden door sent shockwaves through the case and through the town. Graybridge's Historical Commission, once proud of Bellamy's contributions, now held emergency meetings to consider stripping his name from the Civic Center and revoking all honorary titles. A movement formed among residents to rename the public square after Eliza instead. The local paper ran a front-page editorial, "No more secrets in Graybridge." But the secrets weren't done yet. Because the corridor didn't just lead to Bellamy's hidden archive, it also proved something chilling. He had planned this, not Eliza's murder specifically. Perhaps not at first, but the infrastructure for silence. The tunnel, the wall, the absence of records, the falsified permits. He had built a machine for hiding things, and it had worked for decades. Investigators returned to the annex across the street. It had been turned into office space in the early 2000s, but the sub-basement was still intact. There, behind an old HVAC unit, they found another wall with similar signs of tampering. The second wall? Inside, nothing human, but more burned folders, more maps, more ledgers. It was clear now. Bellamy used the annex and the library like opposite ends of a funnel. He moved information, erased what he didn't want seen, and left no trail except for the girl who noticed. The girl who loved stories. The girl who thought hidden doors were magical. Nora Hart was present when the corridor was unsealed. She stood outside the library, wrapped in her daughter's old sweater, her eyes fixed on the entrance. She didn't ask to go inside. She didn't need to. Afterward, Chief Serrano handed her a photo of the slip of paper found in the tin box, Eliza's name in pen. Nora ran her thumb over it slowly, then looked up. He never forgot her. She said, he wrote her name to remember because it scared him. By early winter, The state commission finished its audit. The findings were clear fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, document destruction, and now murder. Though Bellamy was dead, the consequences weren't. Several living associates were implicated in financial misconduct. Others resigned. The town's budget was frozen, pending review. But through all of it, one truth held steady. Eliza Hart had not vanished. She had been taken, and she had been hidden behind a door meant never to be opened. Keep it dark, man. But she opened it. She found it. She saw. Winter came late to Graybridge that year. Like everything else the town had buried. When the first snow finally fell, it blanketed the ground with an eerie calm. The demolition crews had packed up. The barricades were gone. The library was gone. To every brick but one. They saved the wall. Not the one that had hidden Eliza. The one that revealed her. It now stood alone in a quiet garden where the old library used to be, preserved under glass and steel. At its center, the brick Vince Harrow had pried loose sat displayed in a sunlit casing. Just above it, in smooth bronze letters, "In memory of Eliza Hart, 1978, 1989, she saw what no one else would." The opening ceremony drew hundreds. Children held sunflowers. Eliza's favorite? Former classmates stood in silence, some with their own children now. Mark Drenner spoke briefly, his voice soft but steady. He didn't mention Bellamy's name once, only hers. "I never forgot her," he said, "and now none of us will." Nora Hart stood beside Chief Serrano during the ceremony. She wore the same coat she'd worn in the photo used on the missing posters 31 years earlier, faded blue, with frayed cuffs. When she stepped up to the wall, the entire crowd went silent. She placed her hand against the glass. "She was always here," Nora said, not looking at anyone, even when the rest of the world moved on. Then she pulled something from her bag, a small, hardcover copy of The Secret Garden. Corners worn, cover soft from years of thumbing. Eliza's name was written inside in careful pencil, with a tiny heart above they. Nora placed the book gently on the pedestal beneath the plaque. "For you, sweetheart," she whispered. "You found the door." After the ceremony failed, the state issued its final report. Bellamy's fraud network was officially dismantled. Town grants and restoration funds were redirected. 2 former city clerks were indicted for falsifying records. The Graybridge Civic Center, once named after Bellamy, was renamed the Hart Community Center, not just for Eliza, but for Nora, who never stopped asking for answers. The discovery of the hidden corridor led to statewide audits. Other towns reviewed their own annexes and foundation improvements. One more fraudulent structure was found in a nearby county, though no bodies, just paper. Still, the rot had spread farther than anyone wanted to admit. Graybridge had become a cautionary tale and a case study, but mostly it had become a town with a name it could finally say, "Again, Eliza." The garden grew fast in the spring, not just from attention or funding, but from love. Local kids planted bulbs. Retired teachers painted ceramic benches with scenes from Eliza's favorite books. A mural went up on the north side of the garden wall. Eliza, barefoot in a field of pages, hair blown back, holding an open book like it was a compass. At its center, a hidden door, cracked open, light spilling out. The mural's title was simple, She Knew. Vince Harrow stopped by the garden often. He never told anyone why, didn't ask for recognition. But once, a local reporter caught him standing in front of the wall, arms folded, face unreadable. "You okay?" the reporter asked. Vince shrugged, just thinking. Thinking what? That it could have stayed hidden, he said. Another hammer swing to the left. I might have missed it. One more day and it would have been rubble. He paused. But I didn't. She didn't let me. Then he turned and walked away. Chief Serrano transferred 6 months later. She said it was time. That she'd done what she came to do. Before she left, she gave Nora Hart a framed copy of the page from the ledger, the one with Eliza's name, written in ink, underlined 3 times. Beneath it, Serrano had added a handwritten note, not forgotten, never buried. Thank you for not giving up. Nora didn't cry. She just nodded. I never had a choice, she said. She was my daughter. My reason. Mark Drenner came back every year on June 10th. He brought a fresh sunflower and laid it in front of the wall. Then he'd sit quietly, sometimes reading, sometimes just being there. One year, he brought his niece. She asked him what Eliza was like. She liked to read, he said. That's it. He smiled. That's everything. In the decades that followed, Eliza's story was taught in local schools, not just as a tragedy, but as a lesson about observation, about courage, about how the smallest voice can disrupt the biggest lie, and about how a quiet girl with a book changed everything. Eliza Hart was never meant to be a footnote. We took your sample, and in the end, she wasn't. The wall that tried to hide her now stood as her monument. A girl who read alone. A girl who vanished. A girl who was found not just in brick and bone, but in memory, in justice, and in the light that finally poured through the open door she'd never gotten to walk back out of. Eliza Hart's story is a haunting reminder that truth doesn't disappear, it waits. Hidden injustices, no matter how carefully buried, have a way of surfacing when even one person refuses to stop looking. Her quiet curiosity, the very thing that made her an outsider, became the spark that unraveled a decades-long lie. We often overlook the quiet ones, the small moments, the faint signals, but those are often where the truth hides. The lesson is clear. Pay attention. Believe those who speak up, especially when it's inconvenient. And above all, never underestimate the power of a single voice, even when it's whispered behind a wall. Thank you for watching and being part of this story. Your time and attention mean everything. If Eliza Hart's journey moved you or made you think, Please consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this, where truth, mystery, and meaning intersect. Your support helps us keep digging deeper and sharing the stories that deserve to be told. And we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below with your thoughts, theories, or feedback. What resonated with you? What would you like to see next? Your voice helps shape what comes next.